We've got GOAT Format's top decks of April 2023. These deck lists were pretty crazy this month, so I hope you're all ready. Welcome to GOAT Duels. I'm ACP. Now let's get started with this third place Warrior deck by AJT BLS. This player has done really well in GOAT Format in the past, created a lot of innovative decks. This deck is not necessarily entirely original, but it hasn't been played in a while, and there's really a lot to talk about here. So, Warriors, right? The monster lineup looks pretty standard until you see the 3 Mystic Swordsman level 2s. Now, this has been done before. We have seen Sparky Flary run this lineup at Worlds a few years ago, and back then the meta was all chaos, so it was kind of just a meta call. And it's really the same thing here. We sort of see these cycles happen every few years or so where chaos becomes really popular, and then you see a lot of people just man up and go, screw it, I'm just going to play every anti-chaos card in the book, and then chaos gets crushed at a few tournaments. People wonder, like, oh, is chaos still good? Should I switch to something else? Chaos dies down a little bit, the anti-chaos cards come out, and then chaos comes back, and then the cycle repeats. So right now, we're just kind of in the cycle where everyone is getting tired of chaos, and they're just showing up with all the counters. And this is an example of that. In this tournament, actually, first, second, and third place were all Warriors, and all of the Warrior decks were actually maining Mind Control, which is another anti-chaos card. And Mind Control is the second card that I want to talk about here. We've really seen Mind Control pick up in popularity, both on the side, but more noteworthy in the main. Not just Warrior decks. We've been seeing some Chaos decks main the one Mind Control for the mirror. We've been seeing things like even a little bit of Zombies or Earth Aggro. Some of the aggro decks maining Mind Control as well. And the reason why Mind Control is good is because the Chaos players just aren't respecting it at all. Like, they're making no attempt to counter it. There are some exceptions. Like, we did highlight the deck with Interdimensional Matter Transporter last month, and that can counter Mind Control. But yeah, like 95% of the Chaos decks just aren't trying to counter at all. Like, they don't play anything to bait it out. Like, yes, they can set Sangan to bait it out, and they can also set Sinister, although that's kind of risky. But what's going to happen, I think, is either everyone's just going to start baiting Mind Control, or the Chaos players are finally going to realize that they need to play stuff to bait it. Golem Sentry is an option. You could play that to bait Mind Control. Even something like Dark Mimic level 1 and 3, that's kind of the classic Mind Control bait card. Something like Mystic Tomato, you can set Spirit Reaper to bait Mind Control, but then if you put the Reaper in attack, they could just play Mind Control and kill it. So that's an option as well. DD Warrior Lady, I think that's another good option in Chaos decks. In the Chaos Mirror, you can use Warrior Lady to banish a key monster, but then you can also set the Warrior Lady to bait Mind Control. So there are a lot of different options as far as how you can go about baiting Mind Control. But again, Chaos players aren't respecting this, so people are just going to main those Mind Controls. I hate to say it. That's how it's going to go. So something else that I also want to call out, which I don't really have a lot of comment on, but I think it's unusual. This Warrior deck also has no Breaker the Magical Warrior main or side. Not even side. I don't know how I feel about that. Breaker, it's not like the best card in the format necessarily, but it's still pretty decent. Like, worst case scenario, it's a 1900 attack Dark Vanilla, which is pretty okay. I will say Breaker isn't particularly good against the average Chaos deck because a lot of their stuff is chainable, either like Book or Wing Blast or Jar Greed or whatever it is. So I can see maybe why AJT BLS thought, it wasn't really worth maining. You know, there's better cards for the meta. I could kind of get behind that, but I am surprised on no Breaker in the side. We got a Mobius in the side. We've got the Mobius Brain Control pairing, which I do like. I am a fan of that. But I think you also could have thrown a Breaker in here, too. Another thing that I want to call out is the fact they're only playing 9 traps. Royal Decree is quite good against Warriors, and it's just pretty decent in this meta in general. I think Royal Decree is actually one of the more underrated cards right now. But you do see some people playing it. You do see GOAT control decks with Royal Decree. You do see Chaos control decks with Royal Decree. Occasionally maybe even Monarchs with Royal Decree, although that, not so much. So I like the fact that we're only playing 9 traps instead of like 14. That way if we are going up against Decree, it doesn't hurt us quite as much. note that we also got Book of Moon, which we can use under Royal Decree. So as far as warrior decks go, this is more resilient against Decree than most, as it turns out. And the 3 Book of Moons I also want to call out, as that is a very unusual choice in Warriors. I don't remember the last time we saw 3 books in a Warrior deck. It's probably been years. But, you know, as it turns out, pretty good with Mystic Swordsman level 2. I mean, is it the most amazing broken synergy in the game? No, but it's still decent, right? It's decent. You can use Book to, you know, maybe save like your Warrior Lady from a Sakuretsu armor or something. You can stop a Snatch Steal. You can protect your BLS. Protecting your BLS is still quite valuable. And if you happen to go up against Goat Control, well, you're going to be more prepared than most. You've got 3 books to counter those Thousandizer Strix, which is nice. I think it's pretty nice. Pretty solid all around. I mean, it's got a lot of standard choices, right? We still got the 3 Blade Knights. We still got the 3 Kaikus. We still got the 3 Solemns. Side deck is pretty standard. Nothing really too unusual there. But yeah, we decided, look, we're going to play a pretty standard warrior list, but we're going to throw in those Mystic Swordsmen to counter Chaos, Mind Controls to counter Chaos, and the books to go with the Mystic Swordsmen. I like it. I think it's a good list. I think AJT BLS made a good meta call for this tournament. We'll say if you're in kind of a more casual ladder setting, I don't think this deck is necessarily going to be that great just because you're going to go against a lot of unusual decks that this deck doesn't maybe counter. But I think in a tournament setting where you've got a lot of serious players, this deck is going to be pretty high EV. Like, you're either going to get a good bracket and just crush a bunch of Chaos decks, get top 4 the way AJT BLS did, or maybe get a bad bracket, go up against a bunch of Goat Control decks, go 0-2. And that's fine, right? Remember that finishing decent doesn't really count for anything. If you go 2-2 versus 0-2, your prizes are still going to be the same. So might as well kind of play a high-risk, high-reward deck like this where either you're just going to crush a bracket of Chaos decks or you're going to bust out early. It's a pretty good strategy, actually. So in a meta with a lot of Chaos, I think you should definitely give this deck a shot. I think you should have this deck in your toolbox. No pun intended. Next up, we've got a first place Chaos Control deck from Simone. This was from a GOAT format tournament in Italy, I believe. And this is a pretty interesting deck list. And I'm not going to lie, there's definitely a few choices that I disagree with. But it won, and I think it has some good choices too that are worth talking about. One is that I think Golem Sentry is a pretty decent card, actually. Right now, it has that role of baiting out Mind Control, like we talked about before. It is good in your typical Chaos Mirror. And in this list, we've even got some Abyss Soldiers to up the bounce. So if you've got something like a Royal Decree and a Golem Sentry, or a Royal Decree and an Abyss Soldier with the Sinister, you can often just kind of lock out a Chaos opponent from really doing a whole lot, because they can just set one monster turn, you bounce it back, and then that's kind of it. And in the case of Abyss Soldier, you can bounce back your own Decree if you want to, and then maybe set the Solemn or something. Not necessarily something that'll come up a lot, but it's possible. And in this list, we'll also notice that there's only one Chaos Sorcerer, right? Because that's the opportunity cost of playing the double Abyss and the double Golem Sentry is it's going to be harder to support those Chaos monsters. So we can really only run the one. We've got back to square one, since we can't, we don't want to play Wing Blast with the Decree. So we got the back to square one instead, which is fine. It's a good card. Not nearly as good as Wing Blast, still decent. We can even get it back with Magician of Faith and have a lot of back to square one action going. We've got the 2 books to go with the Decree. Pretty standard. We will notice that the main deck does seem to be missing a few spells, which we will talk about later. But I think this list is pretty decent. I think Chaos Control, a list like this, I think is positioned kind of well, only because, one, we're a little more resilient against Mind Control than the average Chaos deck. And 2, I just think that Meta Decree is a pretty good combination right now. Whether it's in Goat Control, Chaos Control, whatever it may be, I think this tends to be a pretty good way to deal with a lot of popular decks right now. As we talked about, against the standard warrior deck, Decree and Meta are pretty good, right? The last warrior deck only played 9 chops. Most play a lot more. I will also say that I think this combo is pretty good against Chaos as well. And the reason why is because so many Chaos decks now play either 1 or even 0 Book of Moons, and instead are kind of relying on the Wing Blast or Raigeki Break to deal with your Thousandizer Strict. So if you play Royal Decree and shut down that stuff, shut down their Ring, shut down their Raigeki Break, shut down even their Solemn, whatever it may be, all of a sudden that kind of gives you free reign to just play that Thousandizer Strict and go ham. Yes, they have a few outs. They got Tribe. They got maybe one Tsukiyomi. They've got their Chaos Monsters. But that's not a lot of outs. And you've got 3 metas, plus Magician of Faith. So odds are your Thousandizer Strix are going to get pretty decent value against a Chaos deck if you have the Decree in play. So that's just something to think about. Now, I will say this side deck is quite strange. I mean, I think everyone will think this is strange. We got 1 Wing Blast, 1 Raigeki Break. That's pretty bizarre. We're siding Delinquent Duo. Now, I mean, I can kind of see why he would do this. He's probably thinking, well, if everyone's playing a bunch of Thunder Dragons and Night Assailants, maybe it's not worth main decking Duo. I still think it is worth main decking Duo, though. That's just the reality. I think people don't understand that, like, even if your Duo hits 2 Thunder Dragons, well, now that means they can't discard them to Graceful, they can't discard them to Card Destruction, they have to, like, use a real card. So even if they have a bunch of Thunder Dragons in their hand, Duo is still pretty decent, and, you know, most of the time, Duo is, like, pretty decent against Warriors, too. I don't know, like, I think Duo is going to go +1 so often that, like, you gotta main it. That's just my opinion. I will say, though, that I actually think not maining Heavy Storm is fine. I have talked about this a little bit in previous videos, but Heavy Storm just isn't that great against the average Chaos deck right now, just because they play so many chainables. Whether it's Jargrade, Wing Blast, Dust Shoot, whatever. A lot of times you can get baited really hard with Heavy. Like, you Heavy, and then they just, like, chain 2 Jargrades or something. Like, it's, a lot of times it feels bad. I think MST is better than Heavy. If I had to, like, main one, but not the other, I'd probably main MST and not the Heavy. But here he's probably thinking, well, I have, like, a bunch of Decrees, and Decree's just better than Heavy and MST. And I could get on board with that, to be honest. I really can. Here we've got the Soul Exchange Mobius combo in the side. I like Brain Control better, to be honest, than the Soul Exchange. Just because I think against decks like Warriors, if they have 2 monsters in play, going Brain Control 1, beat over the other monster, Tribute from Mobius main phase 2, I think that's a lot better than going Soul Exchange Mobius when they have 2 monsters, and then they still get to keep the other one. So, that's my opinion. Maybe there is a reason for going with this Soul Exchange. I don't know. To be honest, the side seems a little thrown together to me. I would like to see something like maybe even the 3rd Goats in the side if we're not maining it, just to have that against aggro decks, have it against Reasoning Gate decks, that sort of thing. I don't know. I will say, though, siding Spell Shield Type 8 seems fine. Is it the best choice? Maybe not, but it's decent. Just because there's a lot of mind controls going around right now. You can counter that. Obviously, you can counter Cross Out. And if you've got, like, an extra spell in your hand, maybe you've got, like, an extra meta you don't need. Or, heck, even Upstart Goblin. If you open with, like, Spell Shield Upstart, you can just not play the Upstart. Discard it to Spell Shield. That's a thing you can do, too. I mean, it's not the worst. So, yeah, I think we could probably all agree that this deck list, probably not optimal per se, but it's got some good ideas. It's got some good ideas. I think it's got some stuff that we can build on. I think playing 2 Golem Sentries, 3 metas, 3 Decree in a Chaos Control deck, I think there's potential there. I really do. And I think it's something that we should explore if we want to counter the meta in the direction that we're leaning right now. Believe it or not, we've also got a 2nd place zombie deck list from Aleph Yatu. And Aleph Yatu is one of the more decorated players of GOAT format, and lately he seems to have been playing a lot of zombies. I don't know if this is because he think zombies are genuinely a good meta call, or maybe he's got a bet going with someone that he won't be able to win with zombies. But this deck list is pretty interesting for sure. He's been trying different configurations, so this is definitely not the only way to go by any means. But this deck has some new technology in it. One is the Knight Assailant plus Slate Warrior combo. Does that count as a combo? I guess it does. Slate Warrior by itself is pretty decent monster. Level 4, 1900 attack. If it happens to die in battle, the monster that killed it is going to take a hit to its stats, which is good. Maybe get it attacked over by a Blade Knight, but now the Blade Knight's only 1500 attack, and then you can run over the Blade Knight with something like Regenerating Mummy. I don't know. And then later on, we can go Tribute to the Doomed, discard Knight Assailant, get back that Slate Warrior. I think that's the idea here. One choice that is also quite interesting is Despair from the Dark. And probably best to just talk about this alongside Regenerating Mummy, because they do something pretty similar, which is that they don't mind being discarded. If the Mummy is discarded, it just goes back to your hand. If Despair from the Dark is discarded, you just get to special summon it to the field. Now, I will say, Despair from the Dark, you can't search it with Pyramid Turtle, because Pyramid Turtle only gets something with 2,000 defense or less. Despair from the Dark, 3,000 defense. So you can't do that. But we can discard it with something like Tribute to the Doomed, bring it back with Book of Life, and it's a pretty beefy guy. Don't know if that makes it worth playing, personally, but I will say that everyone, for the most part, is playing Delinquent Duo. Well, other than the last guy that we looked at. But, yeah, you can sort of hold this in your hand for a while, eventually get hit by Duo, special summon it. Some Chaos decks are playing Card Destruction. Most aren't, but some are. And then some good control decks are playing Morphing Jar. Again, most aren't, some are. And Warriors, of course, are always playing Donzlug, so not saying it's super likely, but it is possible that you could get this hit by Donzlug. And oh man, if I was a Warrior player and I went Donzlug and hit my opponent's Despair from the Dark, I would be so tilted. I would be like, are you kidding me? But yeah, this deck actually looks pretty decent against Warriors. We got the Spy for defense. We've got the Despair from the Dark to buff that Donzlug. And we've got 3 Pyramid Turtles. Recruiters, always good against Warriors. Slate Warrior, pretty decent against Warriors. And again, we got the 3 Royal Decrees. Royal Decree is a pretty good card right now. Now, I will say, I think if I were playing zombies, I might try to play 3 Book of Lives. The problem with Book of Life really is that Kaiku is so popular. And Kaiku, as long as it's in play, you can't activate Book of Life. So that is a little problematic. I can see why maybe we're only playing 2 of those. Everything else looks pretty standard. We have seen the 3 Decrees with the 3 Tribute to the Dooms before. So zombies are really just an aggro deck, right? They're quite a lot different than something like Warriors, but they're still an aggro deck nonetheless. We're playing Tribute to the Doomed. Yes, it's mostly a -1, but it gets something out of the way. We can go Tribute to the Doomed, discard our Despair for the Dark, discard our Ryokoki, and then bring it back with Book of Life, hit for a bunch of damage. That's kind of what we're going for here. I will say that I am surprised to not see any Kaikus in the main deck and only 1 Kaiku in the side. In the past, we have seen zombie decks kind of rely on this Kaiku Book of Life package to keep lights and darks out of the opponent's grave. That was the theory there. But we don't have that today here. And there are other directions that you could go. You could go Giant Rat to get Pyramid Turtle, maybe even throw in Gigantes there, which I know is a card that Alafia likes. I think it's quite surprising to see zombies in second place. Zombies are definitely not a top tier deck. I don't think they've ever been. I think they have a lot of challenges, to be honest. Just the fact that you have to deal with Chaos Sorcerer and Thousand Eyes Restrict. Like, both of those cards are very good against you, and most decks are playing one or the other, if not both. So I definitely think zombies are always a challenge to do well with. But sometimes they can do well. Zombies have won tournaments in the past. It has happened. It could happen again. And I do think the deck is a little underexplored, to be honest. I would consider giving this deck a shot if you're in a fun mood and you want to see what the potential of zombies is. Last but not least, I want to also highlight this 4th placed Goat Control deck from Sentenza. Now, 4th place isn't necessarily an amazing finish per se, but I really like this deck list, and I think it's got a lot of good choices. And I still think that Goat Control is pretty underplayed in 2023. I think there's some potential there, and I'll explain why. Again, we've got the meta Decree combo. I think it's very good right now. And we've got the 3 goats go alongside with those metas and help stop some damage while we have the Royal Decree in play. I think that's pretty good. Everything else is pretty standard. We've got 2 creature swaps, which I think right now you kind of have to play. Like, it's just too good not to. It's not always going to be live, but the times that it is live, it's going to be very strong, and it's going to be one of your main card advantage sources in the Goat Control versus Chaos matchup. Monster lineup is, standard-ish. Goat Control doesn't really have a standard monster lineup, to be honest. I will say the one thing that jumps out at me is 3 Magician of Faith. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I guess it can be okay. If it gets crossed out, you've still got a Merchant, an Azura, and a Zaborg as lights for BLS, so that's fine there. And DD Warrior Lady, too. So, yeah, I think you could play 3 Magician of Faith. Not sure if I would do it, but it's fine. We certainly had a lot of good targets. We got 19 spells, so that's quite a lot of things we can get back there. I do like the one of Azura Priest. I think Azura is pretty good in Goat Control. It's not necessarily amazing in any particular matchup, but in some of the slower, grindier games, it's great at just kind of poking for damage without really committing a lot of resources. One Kaiku I think is fine too. Kaiku is definitely a pretty strong card in this meta, but I don't think you want to play multiples just because it can potentially be a little bricky if you have multiples. So I think 1 is good. I think the DD Warrior Lady and Exiled is fine. The Exiled gives your Call and your Premature Burial a pretty solid target, which is good. Obviously, if you're playing these, you want to have good targets. And then the DD Warrior Lady in Exile also supports the reinforcement of the army on the side, which we'll talk about. Thieves Lure is a card that, I definitely don't think you have to play it, but at the same time, I think it can do a lot. We are playing 3 meta, and I think if you're playing Thieves Lure, you have to play the 3 meta. Like, you can't play the Goat Control list with 2 meta and then play Thieves Lure, because that's the main reason that you're playing it. You're basically playing it as like a level 7 normal summon, and then you can meta your Thieves Lure and get either Lost Warrior from another planet, or you can get King Dragoon, both of which can be pretty strong. And then again, once that Thieves Lure's in your grave, it's another good target for your pre and call, which is nice. And then it won't come up a lot, but you could potentially summon Thieves Lure and then reset its attack with Tsukiyomi. It won't come up a lot, but it can happen. Jinzo I also like. I like both Jinzo and Zaborg, so I like these tribute monster choices. I don't think we necessarily need Jinzo if we're already playing 2 Decrees, but it's still fun. You're not always going to have Decree, and again, it gives you another good target for pre and call. So you definitely got plenty of stuff to shut down traps, which, like I said, I think is really good if you're playing 3 metas. If you're playing 3 metas, I think you want to have ways to shut down traps. And again, everything else is pretty standard. You're kind of playing the Merchant just as sort of a filler card because you want more lights and you want more targets for meta. Swords is a card that, you don't have to play. I think it's fine. I think you could also just side it, to be honest. I think you can even just side the swords and maybe even main a 5th trap. Like, maybe just swap the mirror and the swords, bring the mirror to the main and the swords to the side. I think that's another thing that you could do. I find that in decks with Decree, people aren't expecting to see Mirror Force in game 1, so you can kind of just get people with it. Like, say you had a Decree in play and they killed it with a Breaker or something, often you will just be able to kill 2 or 3 monsters with a mirror because they just assume you're not maining it. So, something worth considering. Another thing worth considering is I think you maybe could increase the count on Book of Moon. It's good with your Thousand Eyes Restrict. It's good with all your flips. It can protect your life points while you have a Decree up. So, I think it's something you could do. Also, it's kind of good with Thieves Lure. It's not amazing, but, it's decent. So, yeah, I think you could even, swap the swords in the book if you wanted to. The side is, nothing really stands out too much other than this one King Tiger Wagyu, which I'm not sure what the theory is on that one. I assume we're bringing it in for Goat Control mirrors, but I don't know if it's good. I don't know. haven't tested it, so who knows? You'll have to test this one and find out. Kuriboh, still a card I love in the side. And like I said before, remaining 2 warriors. And then we side in Rhoda, and then we side in either the Blade Knight and the Mystic for the Chaos decks, or we side in the 2 Zombreya the Darks for warrior decks. And I like this idea a lot, actually. I think this is something that is worth trying out. It means that we effectively are bringing in 3 Zombreyas for warriors, which is quite strong. Goat Control already does pretty well against warriors in game 1. I think you'll do even better post-side with this lineup. And then I really like Mystic Swordsman level 2 against Chaos in particular. Blade Knight also fine. I think Mystic Swordsman is a little better. I think we're bringing in just the Blade Knight because we want to have a light target for that Rhoda. So yeah, I like this. And then Mirror and Churchill, if you're not maining them, yeah, I think you should probably side them. Think you could maybe main one, but that's fine. We've also got the Brain Control Mobius combo, which I like against warriors. The Goat Control list I posted before, I actually had the Brain Control in the main, but I think siding it's fine. Siding it might be better right now, to be honest. I still think Goat Control has potential. I really do. If you're a good player, if you got a good understanding of the meta, and you show up with the right choices, I think you can win. The Chaos decks, they're definitely not going to be free by any means. The Chaos decks are tough. You have to know what you're doing. In many cases, you have to be patient against them. But that's it. I hope you all enjoyed. We will be back next month to show off some more Top Goat format decks. If you like this video, then I think you should watch this one here about Golem Sentry. Take care, guys.